The French Chef is made possible by a grant from Safeway stores.
Everybody's familiar with Irish lamb stew. It's delicious. It has lamb and onions, turnips, carrots, potatoes. But the French have lamb stew too. See the difference today on the French Chef. Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Today we are doing a lovely French lamb stew called Nevarin Printanier. I think it's the best browned lamb stew I ever put in my mouth. It has all the familiar vegetables that Irish stew would have in it, but then it has the addition of green vegetables. I call it a party stew because everyone loves to eat it, and it makes it a sort of a nice change from a formal roast. And one thing that's very good about it, it's inexpensive, and you can make it ahead. And what you're going to use is, I think the best lamb stew meat is from the shoulder. And this is a whole piece of shoulder, and up here's where the neck was, and that's where the head used to be. And here down here is where the loin chop section is, and that is where the lower part of the breast and the shank are. So that gives you a picture of what it all looks like, so that when you buy lamb stew ready cut up, you'll know what it looks like. And the best kind of a lamb stew is made out of various kinds of meat. You want some that's gelatinous, and you want some that is fat, and some that is lean. And if you get this kind of a mixture, sometimes it doesn't look as neat and nice as plain sort of chop or leg cuts. But if you use chop or leg cuts, the meat is very dry. And you want to have the amount that you want to buy of boneless stew meat should be about 1 pound will serve 2 to 3 people. It depends on appetites. And we're going to serve 4 people, so we want 2 to 2.5 pounds. And if you're going to buy the whole piece like this, you'll notice this is the meat side and this is the fat and skin side. And it's some people who don't like lamb, it's because of the fat, which has the strong taste. And if you're going to cut the meat yourself, just cut the fat off. And there's also a fell, usually, which is the covering, sort of a rather tough covering where the skin was. And I'm using a knife that I got when we were in Norway, and it sort of looks nice for cutting things off. The curved blade is much better when you're going to cut meat. When I was talking to my butcher yesterday when I got this lamb, I asked him if I couldn't have a job butchering. He was very nice refusing me. He said I was all right as a home butcher, but I'd need quite a bit more training if I was going to work for him. But I think it's fun to cut the meat yourself, and then you have more idea of what you're getting. And what I'm doing, I'm just taking the strip of fat off and just scraping against it with my knife. And if you buy the meat already cut up, you should look at each piece and take the fat off too. I think if I put my glasses on, I could see a little bit more, so I seem to be cutting some of the meat off along with the fat. There. So see, it's just a matter of pulling. And I really think if you want to be sure to get the fat off, it's easier to get the whole bone piece of lamb and pull the fat off yourself. And now there's fat inside, and you take that off too. And then we're not going to use this whole piece. This is about a 4-pound piece. I got the whole thing so you could see it. And then when you get your fat off, you cut it into 2-inch pieces. And up here, this is where the lamb chopped section is. You can just cut it right through, and then cut the pieces into about 2-inch sort of morsels. And you would have at least 2 pieces of meat per person. And if we're serving 4, we'll want 8 to 12 pieces. And this is another piece I'm just cutting. This is never a very neat job, particularly, at least for me, when I'm cutting it myself, but I like to do a little mixture. And now I want to show you another piece of lamb, which this is the lamb shank. And these are usually very inexpensive, and you can use the lamb shank. You often hear of braised lamb shanks. And people say, oh, I wish I had a recipe for braised lamb shanks. But you can use braised lamb shanks in this recipe. Now, we're going to brown the meat. This is very much like any brown stew. And I'm going to brown it in cooking oil. And I want just enough cooking oil in my pan so that the pan will be filmed. And get a nice, if you're going to do browning, get a nice heavy pan that will hold the heat well. I have an aluminum one, which is hotel weight. You can usually get these in hotel stores, or some of the markets carry them, but they're much better than those flimsy little home pans. And also be sure now, while your oil is heating, that you dry your meat. I'm just putting this in paper towels, because you can't dry your meat unless, you can't brown your meat unless it is dry. Otherwise it just stews. And then when your oil is hot, you put your meat in. And the only secrets to browning, we've done this several times, are hot oil, dry meat, and don't crowd your pan. I've really got now just about as much meat in the pan as I can have at this point. And if I'm serving 8 or 9 people, I would have to do the meat in several batches. And you can use, I think tongs are very useful to turn the meat with, or a spoon or whatever you like. Now I'm not going to brown it thoroughly, because I don't want to take all that time, because it will take about 10 minutes to brown it all. So when it's nicely browned, you put it into your casserole. There. And see, if you were doing a whole lot of it, you would just brown it in your pan and then add it to the casserole as it was done. And anytime you want to keep your pan filmed with there's just enough oil so that the meat won't burn. And then you'll notice in your pan here that you have this nice browned, sort of browned residue, and you want to add some kind of liquid to that and let it boil down. And then you come back to your browned meat, and we want to make the sauce have a beautiful mahogany brown color, so you're going to add a little bit of sugar to that, about 2 tablespoons, and then we want to heat that so that, toss it. I think I'll do better tossing it with some pot holder. Want to toss that around and let it cook over a fairly high heat until the sugar has caramelized, and that takes 3 or 4 minutes. But the browning also gives the meat, the browning of the sugar caramelizes the surface of the meat, and then also when you put in your stewing liquid, that will give you a lovely brown sauce. And now we come back to our frying pan, and the kind of liquid that we're going to cook the meat in is a meat stock. And you could, if you save all the bones from the lamb, you can make a nice brown lamb stock with that by just browning the bones and adding carrots and onions and water and probably a bit of beef stock and boiling it for 2 hours. Or you can use canned beef stock or any kind of homemade stock that you have. And then I'm going to put this over to the side. After your sugar has browned in here, and you can see that it's browned a little bit on the surface, you are then going to add some flour. which is going to thicken the sauce. And we want to have, we're serving it for 4 people, and we want about 2½ cups of sauce. So we will add 2½ tablespoons of flour. There's a heaping tablespoon, which is the same as 2 level ones, and that's about another ½ tablespoon of flour. And then, again, you take the meat and you toss it. You see what a useful method this tossing is. It's much easier than stirring. And when the tossing movement is, it's an up and down circular movement. You see, like that. Because if you tried to turn it and stir it, it would be much more difficult. And now with our frying pan here, after your flour has browned, and this should take about 2 or 3 minutes over moderate heat, you would then add your liquids. And I'm going to add the liquid from this frying pan, but first you want to stir up the bottom of it to get off all the nice coagulated meat juices. That's part of your kitchen treasure. And the flour has now browned, and so in goes your stock. And then you're going to add a little bit more stock because you want to have the meat just barely covered. And then, you see, this is a very easy way to clean your frying pan. You see there's practically nothing on that you have to wash off. And then also, as soon as you finish with it, you put it in, run cold water over it in the sink, and then it's very easy to wash. And always do that with all of your utensils. Some people say, oh, French cooking takes so many casseroles and everything else. But if you always, as soon as you're through with them, if you always soak them in water, they're very, very easy to clean. And now we have our lamb stew ready with the liquid in, and we're going to also have to have some flavorings in. And these will be the typical flavorings that would go into the Nevarin, or they could go into most any lamb stew. And we're going to have some tomatoes. And these are just going to be whole tomatoes, which are going to be what the French call concassé, which means you're going to cut them and squeeze the juice out. And you can always use the juice for something else, but you don't want to have the juice into your Nevarin because you want to have a more exciting flavor than just plain tomato juice. Now I'm holding the tomato and just squeezing it. And in this case, we don't have to peel the tomatoes because we're going to strain the liquid when we get through with what is known as the first stage of this lamb stew cooking. And now the tomatoes simply get chopped roughly into pieces. I'm using 3 tomatoes here, and I like fresh tomatoes the best, but you can use drained canned tomatoes, or you can use tomato paste. If you use drained canned tomatoes, you use about, I should say, 3/4 of a cup. But you be sure to drain the juice out, and then you end up about the way you have here. Now there are the tomatoes in, and then we are going to have some bay leaf. That's a broken one, so I'll put in 2 halves. And we want some rosemary. Rosemary is extremely good with lamb, and I'm going to put in about ½ teaspoonful. And then we should have some garlic, which I don't seem to have. But you take 3 cloves of garlic and cut them in half, and they would go in, and you don't even need to peel them because the garlic skin also has flavor. And we also want some salt, but you want to be very careful and taste your liquid before you add any salt, because you've added bouillon and that has already been salted. So taste it. And that could stand just a little bit. But you don't want to over salt it, because if you do, it's going to reduce a little bit. So I'm using some of this coarse kosher salt, and I'm going to put in about half a tablespoonful. And then that can be stirred around. And as you've noticed, this is, I think, one of the first recipes that we haven't had any wine in. You could put some white wine in if you like, but this Nevarin recipe does not call for wine. And now, what's the nice thing about this recipe is that you can get it ahead in so many different stages. After you've gotten your meat brown, and you remember you tossed it with your 2 tablespoons of sugar so that you got the sugar caramelized, and then again you made the tossing with the flour, and the flour is what thickens the stew. And then you put in your flavoring and your meat stock. You can set it aside uncovered and go on and cook it later, but you might actually just as well cook it now, because at any stage you can really stop it and continue. And in this first stage, where it's just cooking with the juices and the seasonings, this is going to cook for 1 hour. It takes 2 hours in all to cook. But this is just going to cook for 1 hour, and you can cook it either on the stove or in the oven. It doesn't make any difference as long as you have a nice heavy pot. I have a casserole here which is cast iron with an enamel coating, which I like extremely well, because you can cook something and leave it in the casserole and you won't have any sort of alteration of flavoring. If you use an iron casserole that has no lining in it, I think the best thing to do is, after you've done your cooking, to take it out of the casserole, because once in a while you will run into problems of the casserole rusting, or sometimes it turns the sauce a blackish color. If you had a heavy aluminum one, you could also leave the casserole in and it would be perfectly all right. And now I'm going to put this into the oven, and this is going to go into a 325-degree oven, and it's going to cook very slowly for 1 hour. And then after it's cooked for 1 hour, I have another one at this stage, then we're going to take it out and degrease it. So I'm going to put this here and get rid of some of the things that I don't need anymore. Now, the reason that you want to do the degreasing at this time is that by 1 hour, the stew is cooked long enough so that the fat has come out. And then once you do this degreasing, then you don't have to go ahead and do any more. So just pour it right through a colander. And then we'll put the meat back in. And at this point, if you had some meat that had bones in it, by the time it had cooked an hour, you would have, the bones would be loose enough so that you could take them out. You see, at this point, the tomato skin is left in the background. I think if I had a bigger spoon, this would go a little quicker. And there I can see our bay leaf in there. That's why in this recipe you don't need to wrap up your herbs in a cheesecloth, because you're going to do this work anyway. And so there's what's left of tomato skins and bay leaf. And then at this point you would be very careful to degrease your stew. You would tip your bowl up and take your big spoon and take off all the grease. Again, I've cheated a little bit here. I took the grease off before you saw it, because I didn't want you to take so much time for you to see degreasing, which actually will take 2 or 3 minutes if you want to get all the grease off. But a very good system, because at this point you can do this ahead and put your stew into the oven into the refrigerator, and let the grease congeal on the top, and it's very easy to get off then. And now we're going to add our some of our vegetables. These are the root vegetables. Root vegetables are those that grow underground. And we have here, we have potatoes, and at this point these just all go in. And I have 2 potatoes per person. That's 8 peeled potatoes. And be sure that you use boiling or all-purpose potatoes. And I have turnips. I have here the yellow turnips, the rutabagas, which are awfully good. And I also have some small boiled onions, and you will notice that I have pierced across in this root end of each one, and that makes for more even cooking. And then I have 2 peeled and quartered carrots. They've been quartered lengthwise, and those all just sit in there. And then you want to put some salt on them. And then also baste them with the liquid in the pan. And I think a ball baster is very useful for this. And then this gets covered, and this will cook for another hour or until the vegetables are tender. And so I think the vegetables really cook better in the oven, but if you have a heavy casserole the way I have here, you can cook them on top of the stove. So I'm just going to cook these very carefully on top of the stove. And at this point you have I have one here which is now all ready. This is cooked for an hour with the vegetables in, and as soon as it's done, you poke all your vegetables and your meat with a knife, and when they're tender, it's done. And at this point, again, you can leave the Nevarin and let it cool and reheat it. But at this point, too, this stew is called a Nevarin, just simply when it has the root vegetables in. But if you want to make it a Nevarin Printanier, meaning a spring lamb stew, you would add green vegetables just at the end. Of course, we now have green vegetables all year round, so it doesn't have to be a spring stew at all. And what we're going to do is to add green beans and peas, but these have to be blanched. That means lightly cooked first. And the beans are going to be just cut into 1-inch pieces. And when you're preparing the beans, here's your whole bean. You just snip off the end of each, and you don't have to have very many beans if you don't want to. These are mostly just for decoration. And then gather them together and just cut them into 1-inch pieces. And the beauty of this stew is the fresh vegetables, having everything fresh. Fresh potatoes, fresh peas, fresh beans. That's what gives it its perfectly lovely taste. You can do it with frozen ones too, of course, but I think the delight of it is in everything being fresh. And now we're going to cook these. And these you can do ahead also, as you will see. I've got a very large pot of boiling water here because I just want you to see the French method of blanching beans. There goes our peas in, and here go our beans in. And these should cook at a rapid boil for about 5 or 6 minutes. As soon as you drop them in, they should come back to the boil very quickly, and this is salted water. And then you taste them in about 5 or 6 minutes, and when they're almost done, you then take them off and refresh them. I'm not going to leave them in as long as they should, but the point of having the large pot of water is it will come quickly back to the boil and cook the beans quickly and the peas. Then as soon as they're almost tender, you then drain them. And I'm using the large pot of water purposely to show that it has to be a large one, or you're not going to get the effect of seizing the beans and keeping the color in them. And then as soon as you've drained them, run cold water off them, and that immediately stops the cooking. This is exactly the way they start out, the commercial companies, when they're doing frozen beans. They always blanch them first in a large pot of water. And so I have some here that have already been blanched and refreshed. And These you can do ahead, and then when your casserole is bubbling, you just pour the beans and the peas in. And this should be done only at the last minute. And then cover the casserole. I think, as a matter of fact, they should be basted with the juices. These ball basters are certainly wonderful. And then you want to be sure again to taste. And at this point, you have to put in your final flavoring if it needs more salt or pepper. That's awfully good. At that point, you put in your final flavoring. Then you cover your casserole, and you would let it cook for just about 5 or 6 minutes until the beans were tender and they had absorbed the flavor of the sauce. And then when you're ready, you have a very warm platter, and you just put your lamb stew into it. And you can serve it in the casserole if you want, or you can serve it on the platter. If you want to be very fancy, you can arrange all the meat and the vegetables separately. I rather like this sort of, can't remember what they call it in the supermarkets, the tumble technique. And if you've gotten a little bit of sauce on the edge of the platter, wipe it off. And as you see with this, we've had several stages where you could have it all done, stop the cooking, refrigerate it, and then go on. So it makes a wonderful dish to serve for a party, and it smells so good. The whole house just smells of perfectly delicious stew. And here you are, you have a complete one-course meal. You have your lamb, and you have your turnips, and you have your onions and your potatoes and your carrots and your peas, and then you have all of your sauce. And it really makes, it's so pretty, and it smells so good. So with all this, all you need to serve would be some hot French bread. And you could use either a rosé wine, or you could use a red Beaujolais, which would be delicious. And then if you had a little more wine left, you could follow it with some cheese. And then you'd have a fruit dessert. This would be a very French menu. And be sure when you serve it that you serve it on very hot plates, because any fat that there is in the lamb can congeal a little bit, and you have the plates just as hot as they can be. And so, next time you have company, give them a lamb stew, but make it like this and call it a Nevarin Printanier. So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
Julia Child is co-author of the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking.